everyone, so today I'm going to be showing you what I carry in my project bag. And I don't really carry a ton of stuff with me, but I thought this video would be helpful just in case if you're unsure of what would be helpful to carry in your project bag. So the project bag I'm going to be showing you today is actually my knitting bag. I don't carry as much stuff in my crochet bags. I do have multiple bags because I have multiple projects going on and I like to keep them separated. I normally only have one knitting project at a time. Knitting sometimes takes me a little bit longer, so I like to only have one of them and not get too overwhelmed with a ton of knitting projects. But I usually have multiple crochet ones. But today, this knitting project is actually a t-shirt that I've been working on, and this is what my bag looks like. And it's just a simple canvas bag. This bag I actually got as a gift from Estee Lauder. I bought one of their makeup kits and it came with the free gift, and this was the free gift, and I just thought it was such a pretty bag. I love the pink and blue with the flowers. It's just really pretty. So let's just get right into this. The first thing I usually have in my knitting bag is this stitch marker case, and this little case is actually made for fishing. I went to the fishing department at Walmart and got one of these little cases. It just keeps them nice and separated from the different kind of stitch markers I carry. So I have basically different kinds. I have these two types of stitch markers, and these are little circled ones. And basically they are opened, they're not completely closed, which is helpful if you just need to hook it on a stitch and you're going to be moving it a lot, so you don't have to unlatch it or anything. And it comes in two different sizes. Then I have the traditional stitch markers, and hopefully these, I don't know if you're going to be able to see very well, but basically they're these little just traditional, I just dropped one. They're just the traditional stitch markers. They're rings that are closed, so with knitting, if you're working in rounds, you'll just slip it on one knitting needles and then slip it on the next one. These, if you place them, you're not going to be able to remove them unless you come across it again. Then I have these stitch markers. These are the ones you just latch on. So if you need to mark a stitch, these are really helpful because it actually latches, so it's going to stay in place. Then I have some fun ones. This one hangs down. It's a little colorful box. This one has a little lobster claw. So this one is also helpful if you want to mark a actual stitch and you need it to stay there. This one I don't really use a lot because I find that the lobster claws can kind of be a little tedious and they're not as smooth with putting on and removing. I also have these metal ones, and this one definitely has a sharper point to it. This one is really helpful if you need to use it on more of a delicate, smaller yarn because it's such a small little wire. It's definitely easier to put it on than trying to force a bigger stitch marker in a very small stitch. So that's where these are very helpful. And they're a little bit pointier, so make sure if you do have these, be careful because you definitely can cut yourself and really kind of hurt your fingers if you're not watching. They're basically like little safety pins. And the last kind of stitch marker I have here are these little socks, and I got these from a Simply Knitting magazine. So they're these little sock stitch markers, and basically these are just these tiny little stitch markers. They're on this little key ring to keep them on there, and they just dangle off. They're used for whenever you make socks. It's kind of more meant for smaller needles. These can be nice. I'm not a huge fan of stitch markers that dangle because they tend to get in my way and the yarn gets caught in them. So I'm not really a huge fan of these. I keep them more as just little decorations. Alright, so the next thing in my bag is going to be the magazine that I'm using for this project. So this is the Super Crafts Knit Your Style magazine. I got this a few years ago, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to still find this magazine. This is a really great magazine. They have a lot of cool and awesome trendy clothing in here, but also good classics. But this is what I've been using for the t-shirt that I am making. And of course, since I'm making a t-shirt, I have the yarn that I'm using. So one of the skeins I'm using is the Red Heart Dream Catcher. I'm going to be using this for the top portion of my t-shirt. It's going to be a little bit lacier, so I'm going to be using this yarn on the top part. And the other yarn I'm using is the Yarn Bee. This is I believe it's their cake yarn, and it's made out of worsted weight. I'm not sure what color pattern this is, but that's the yarn I'm using for the bottom portion of the t-shirt. And then of course I have the actual t-shirt that I'm knitting right here. Woo, that almost hit me. It's right here, and this is what it's starting to look like. I'm working from the bottom up, so this is just the bottom portion, and this is how far I've gotten on it. So anytime I have a knitting project bag, I always have to make sure I have a notebook in it. I love to make sure I keep track of my rows. That's extremely important, especially in garment making. So I just have this little notebook. It's a 5-star notebook that I believe I got from Walmart, and it's this beautiful yellow color. It makes me really happy. It's such a sunshiny color. So that's the one I have. And then of course you gotta have a pencil. I always seem to lose my pencils whenever I'm working on projects, so I always make sure to have one at least at the bottom of my bag. So I also have a pencil. Okay, so this is the case that I carry in my knitting bag. This one literally goes from knitting bag to knitting bag if I end up changing the actual bag. And this case is actually a little clutch that my grandma bought me, and it was a graduation present, and she ended up passing away. And she was a knitter, so it's very precious to me because it's something it was one of the last gifts she gave me, along with actually a blanket she knitted me. So I just kind of like to keep this with me in honor of her. So it's this little clutch, and in the front little zippered portion, I keep a pair of scissors. I like to keep what I'm going to be using the most in the front pouch, so I use scissors a lot to cut off my yarn. And then I also like to keep a tape measure, because if I'm working on a garment and I need to measure it, I gotta have one. So I just like to keep that and my scissors in the front pocket, so it's easy to grab and easy to get to. And then in the main section of the clutch, I have my yarn needles, and these are by, I believe, Clover, and they're really nice. They're kind of slanted at the bottom, so it makes it really easy to weave in your ends, and it just comes with this really handy case to keep all of the needles together. So I have that in there. I also have this little knitting gauge ruler, and it also has all the sizes, or most of the sizes, of knitting needles. So if you have a knitting needle, you're not sure what size it is, you can just poke it through, figure out what size it is, and then you know, okay, this is size 7. And then you can put it away or maybe mark it so you won't forget. And then it also has a little ruler on here, so if you're making a gauge swatch, you have this little handy dandy ruler to make sure your gauge is on point. I also have some cable needles in here, because anytime you do a cable project, you need to have a cable needle. I'm one of those people where I can use pretty much any item as a cable needle. When I was first learning to make cables, I actually used a pencil because I did not own a cable needle, and so I thought, well, this is better than nothing. So I had one of those yellow pencils, and I used that for the longest time. No matter what size needle I was using, I used a pencil, and you can imagine sometimes the cable ended up a little bit looser than it should have. But I have these 2 cable needles. This one's a little bit bigger, this one's a little bit smaller. What's nice about cable needles is whenever you put your cable on here, this little swoop down little area, the little U part, holds the stitches so they won't slide off, as they won't be as likely to slide off. And then you just put it in the back or the front of the work, whatever type of cable you're making. I also have this little slider case. This keeps the little stitch stopper. If you ever are working on a knitting project and your stitches are pretty close to the edge and you're worried they're gonna fall off, make sure you buy some of these little stitch stoppers. They just sit on like a hat on top of your knitting needles, and they'll keep your stitches from sliding off. And they usually come in different sizes. Like this one right here is pretty wide, so if it's a bigger needle, they're not going to the bigger stitches will not slide off. So I just keep them in this little case just to make sure they're all nice and handy. So the last thing I have in here is this little stitch holder, and this one is actually my great-grandmother's stitch holder, so it's kind of cool to have a little bit of history with me in my little pouch. So this is just, like I said, a stitch holder, so anytime you maybe need to set some stitches aside for maybe if you're working on a garment in the neck, you need to set some stitches on a stitch holder for whenever you do the collar after you're finished. This is a great thing to have, so you just slide your stitches on there and then you will just loop it back over so it's locked and the stitches cannot fall off. But yes, so that is the last thing I have in that little pouch, and that's actually the last thing I have in my project bag. So not a ton of stuff in my knitting bag. I just like to make sure I have the necessities. But yes, so that is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments below what you like to keep in your knitting bag. I would love to know, because just in case if I'm missing anything, I know there might be one or two things. But I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!